Welcome to this special edition of USC at the Voice of College Football. It's one of our summer specials and a great guest today. We talked to college football publishing legend and just really plain publishing legend, Phil Steele. You know him, you love him. It's his time of year. It's the summer, 1 month away from the start of the season, 4 weeks away from USC's huge game against LSU in week 1 in Las Vegas on Sunday of Labor Day weekend. So Phil Steele, welcome back to the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. It's great to have you today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Matt. Real pleasure.
Okay, first off, let's tend to business here. Where can people find your magazine? Anything else you want to share about your excellent product that people flock to year after year?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. You know, the magazine is 352 pages, and we give you 2 full pages on every single team. Same amount of coverage on a team like Akron or Georgia Southern that we give you on Alabama or USC. And basically, it's like getting 134 media guides rolled into one. Now, you can only get it at Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. So if you're out driving around looking for it, you don't have to go to Walmart's or grocery stores. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million are the 2 brick and mortar stores to get it. Or you can go online at philsteele.com. And when you go there to order the magazine, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge. It costs to ship things. But we give you the digital magazine absolutely free. And we actually update the digital magazine all the way through September. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com. And one last thing, every day on philsteele.com, I give out some great articles, things for the upcoming season. Make sure you check out my daily blog.
All right, I do want to ask about USC, but I actually do have one more follow-up question, and that just is, hey, you've been in this game a long time. How has the publishing industry and the challenges of, getting top-tier information and insight on each team throughout the FBS, how has the nature of the business changed, if at all, over the decades that you've been involved? Anything that really strikes you about what's different today, or perhaps how much it really hasn't changed? What's your experience?
Yeah, the biggest difference, Matt, is clearly the transfer portal. The last 3 years has been pretty remarkable. I do the magazine in a 3 write-through process. The first write-through is after the season's over. I read through every article that's written about the team and gives me a good ebbs and flows of what happened last year, not only of the team overall, but of each position. And then I write the first write-through. The second write-through is start of spring. We get the rosters. You've got the freshmen signed and rewrite the positions that need to be rewritten. The third one is after talking to the head coaches. And I talk to the head coaches after the spring is over. I talk to over 134 head coaches and gets our final write-up. But we weren't able to go to the press this year until June 7th because of the transfer portal. The portal closed on April 30th. We knew everybody that was in the portal, but we had to wait for them all to sign. So we give it the entire month of May, the first week of June. I mean, we used to be able to go to the press the middle of May and we knew all the rosters. Now we have to wait till the first week of June till we finally get it all straight. So the transfer portal is the biggest difference.
All right, let's now shift to USC. That's what our fans are here for at the USC channel. I will drill deeper into some specific topics, but first, the floor is yours, Phil. Just give us your overview of USC, just where you see this program, where you see this team, your main concerns, and just how you kind of framed this 2024 USC season.
You know, when you look at USC, they're taking a move to the Big Ten, which is, of course, a big difference from last year. But I'll say this, last year, the Pac-12 was on par with the Big Ten and the SEC. Those 3 conferences were all pretty close. It was the best the Pac-12 had probably been in 15 years. It's ironic that was the last season. I'm rather remiss that the Pac-12 is gone. However, USC last year was number 10 on my experience chart. This year, they dropped down to number 104. Generally, that means a drop off in the record. But when I look at USC, I'm bullish on them for a couple of reasons this year. Now, they lose their quarterback in Caleb Williams, but let's face it. Last year, when you look at USC, 5 of the last 6 games during the regular season, they lost. And I really like what I saw to Miller Moss in a bowl game with his 6 touchdown passes. They've got a guy in Lincoln Riley who just produces Heisman Trophy candidates all the time. I don't have a lot of concerns with the offense. They have a veteran offensive line. tons of talent at the running back position. Zachariah Branch, a wide receiver. And when I talked to Coach Riley, he was just in the middle of addressing the depth at wide receiver. I mean, they lost the depth, but they brought in 3 transfer guys. And actually, the depth looks pretty good there. So the offense is going to be potent. The biggest change with USC this year is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Last year, their defense was, well, it was below average. There's no doubt about it. They gave up 433 yards per game, 34 points per game. This year, I've got what is called 9 starters back. And I count if you started for another team and come here that you are a returning starter as long as you wanted the job out of spring. So there are a lot of newcomers. The biggest one's probably their defense coordinator, Danton Lynn. Lynn did a fantastic job with UCLA there, and I think he can do the same here. He's brought in some excellent transfers, including some from UCLA, like John Humphrey and Kamari Ramsey coming in, and I think that really is going to shore up the defense. So with an improved defense and a still explosive offense, I see USC possibly even topping last year's 8-win total.
In terms of your overview of the USC defense and just any concerns that you have, I noticed that in your position group rankings, the secondary received what I felt was a relatively low ranking. I think all of your other rankings were pretty much spot on. The secondary is the one that stood out. And so what went into your ranking of USC secondary? And I would just preface this question by noting that, Dante Williams did not do a good job with this secondary, with the corners in particular last year. Like Domani Jackson was, an elite recruit. USC fans were really hopeful that he could take off, but he did not get developed well by Dante Williams. And now you have Doug Belk coming in as secondary coach, and you have defensive analyst Taylor Mays, who, with the removal of the limit on the number of coaches who can coach in the stadium and on the practice field, that NCAA policy change implemented in the offseason, Taylor Mays is the guy who developed this secondary with basically 2 weeks to prepare for that Holiday Bowl game. And so he's now a more hands-on coach that USC is going to have in that room. So how did your evaluation of the secondary factor in all of the defensive coaching changes, Dante Williams going out and then Taylor Mays and Doug Belk coming in? Because a lot of USC fans think we're going to get a much better coached unit, and yet you have still real concerns about the secondary. So, what was the formula? What was the thought process that went into all of that with the secondary grade?
Yeah, well, you start with the basics. When I look at a position, the first thing I look at is what kind of shape were they heading into last year, what happened last year, and what kind of shape are they heading into this year. And when I look at USC. Last year, they were number 111 in my past defense rankings. They were one of the weakest secondaries out there. And they go and lose a player like Domani Jackson. They lose Roland Wallace, who is an undrafted free agent. They lose a number 3 draft pick in Kalen Bullock. They lose Max Williams, who had 8 starts last year. So they lose basically the entire starting secondary. And so you have a brand new secondary from a team that wasn't very good. Generally, I don't have them even anywhere near my top units, if that's the case. But I love the additions that they have. As you mentioned, the coaching additions are a big-time plus. Plus, bringing in guys like DeCarlos Nicholson and John Humphrey at the cornerback spots, Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey at the safety spots, a bunch of transfers coming in that should be good. I moved them all the way up from number 111 up to number 55, but I wasn't quite ready to say, hey, these guys are going to be great because they were very poor last year and lost everybody from last year's unit. So a lot of it's based on what you hope they're going to do this year, but still making my top unit rankings was something that wouldn't normally happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's more than fair. I think an interesting nuance here, Phil, is that, we talk about experience all the time in sports, college, pro, whatever. And one of the nuances about experience is that sometimes experience isn't necessarily good. Like if you were bad and you're a returning starter, experience isn't necessarily a positive. So I think a lot of people will want to know, how do you balance the value of experience on a general level with that specific notion of, well, if you're a returning starter from a unit that didn't perform well the previous season and you have new coaching, how do you weigh that? How do you regularly wrestle with those competing tension points as a college football analyst?
Yeah, and like I just mentioned, it's something where I did weigh all those factors this year because generally, if you're number 111 and you lose all four starters, yeah, I'd have you at 125. And yet I've moved USC all the way up to one of the top units in the country at number 55. I understand by USC standards, that's not very high, but I did recognize the fact that they have a bunch of newcomers coming in. Now, the one thing you also have to factor in is, we haven't seen it on the field. I need to see a little something that says they're going to be better than that. So I think taking them from the bottom to the middle was a big step for me, and the hope is there for more.
All right. In terms of looking at USC's defense a little more, I think one particular factor is the strength of schedule. They're going up against LSU out of the gate in week one. They're going to go up against some pretty good offensive lines over the course of this season. How much does that affect what you're expecting from USC's defense? And obviously, you did mention that the Pac-12 was a beast last season, but in the Big Ten, like, you have those farm-grown offensive linemen. It's a robust physical challenge for a USC defensive front that is good, but not necessarily deep. How much have you weighed USC's concerns about depth in terms of your overall assessment of this Trojan defense this year?
Yeah, everything goes into my equation: depth, experience, coaching change, situation, opponents. And my computer always spits out the numbers at the end where it's projecting a team for the year and is showing an improvement by USC despite the tough schedule. I mean, they play the third toughest schedule in the country this year. We're talking about LSU, as you mentioned, in the opener. At Michigan is not an easy task. And Notre Dame, another non-conference team on top of the Big Ten schedule. It is one of the toughest schedules in the country. But overall, I do see this as an improved unit and think they'll put up better numbers.
Another obvious question that I think a lot of USC fans want to get Phil Steele's analysis on is just the Lincoln Riley defense question. And people know that he hired new defensive coaches. So he was aware of the problem. He knew he couldn't run it back with Alex Grinch for another season. He should have fired Grinch after the Cotton Bowl against Tulane. He didn't, but that's water under the bridge. But what's your deeper assessment of Lincoln Riley as an overseer of a full program? That we know he spits out great quarterbacks, wide receivers, as you mentioned, but where is the defensive accountability? And I think, Phil, that's kind of the insight I've gained in the offseason. It's not as though college football experts aren't aware that he changed his defensive staff, but they still don't trust that there's going to be ultimate accountability from the guy at the top of the organizational pyramid. Like Lincoln Riley, he might make coaching changes, but for a lot of college football analysts, I get the sense, Phil, it's rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. That Lincoln Riley really has to be accountable, and he has to promote a culture of accountability, something he hasn't done on the defensive side of the ball in his several seasons as a head coach. Is that pretty much the right way to read Lincoln Riley in terms of getting results out of his defense, or is there something else that you're specifically noting, something you've specifically seen, observed, studied about Lincoln Riley that makes you skeptical that he will begin to field a good defense at USC?
Actually, I'm a big fan of Lincoln Riley. I think he's one of the better head coaches out there. I understand that his defenses haven't been wonderful at either Oklahoma or USC, but I really like the hire of D'Anton Lynn. I was not wild about the hire of Grinch. I thought the job he did at Ohio State was okay. And the job he's done here under Lincoln Riley wasn't great. So I really like the new hire defense coordinator. I think that shows a priority for Lincoln Riley going out and getting this guy. And I think that overall, when you look at the defense, you look at the players they have added this year, they have focused on that. Not as much focus on the offense as on the defense. Everything I do want to point out is when your offense is scoring points so quick, generally your defense is going to be given up because they're facing more plays in each game. And you see that in a lot of different teams. I know I've seen teams that were known for great defenses and all of a sudden say, we're going to change our offense. We're going to go to the hurry up offense. Guess what? You're going to add 6-7 points per game to that defensive side of the ball because you're facing more plays per game. And I think that's one of the problems with Lincoln Riley's defenses is his offenses are too damn explosive.
That does lead me to a question about this LSU game. Let's just deal with that for a brief minute before we, kind of pan back out and look at the rest of the USC roster, Phil. In this USC LSU game, there's a really big debate among USC fans. Like, what's the best way to try to play this game? Is it, well, let's just try to get a 14-0 lead and take away the run game from LSU and send our pass rushers after Garrett Nussmeier, who isn't nearly as fast as Jaden Daniels? Or does USC need to be much, much more of a ball control team in this LSU game and throughout this 2024 season just to, get 35 minutes time of possession so that defense just isn't on the field as much? How do you weigh those two things? Is it get a 14-0 lead, or is it play the long game and with an eye toward time of possession? What's your thought?
Well, I'll tell you what, if USC and LSU played last year, I would have put the over-under total at about 80 because you would have had some points on the board. You had two of the best quarterbacks in the country. You had two below-average defenses. Would have been an entirely different game. LSU's a much different team this year. Now, last year, they had a quarterback that was rushing for 1,000 yards. They only handed the ball off to their running backs 280 times last year. This year, I expect them to hand the ball off about 380 times. But that doesn't mean that the pass game won't be effective because Nussmeier is a very quality pocket passer, and he's got some weapons to throw to. So I think their offense will be less than last year. And go back to the last time LSU lost a Heisman Trophy winner. Go back to 2019. They had averaged 48 points per game that year with Joe Burrow. The next year, they dropped down to 32. A drop of 16 points per game. Now, I'm not calling for that big of a drop-off, but I do think you'll see a 7 to 10-point drop-off. So they go from a team that averaged 46 points per game maybe to 35 this year. Defensively, they are better. And once again, they will benefit from the offense not scoring as quickly because they're going to be on the field a little bit less this year. So I think both teams are very similar in that respect. I bring that total from 80 all the way down to maybe in the 60s because it should be a lot lower scoring game here. I don't think it's going to be a defensive struggle or anything like that. Your ideal situation as would always be, Matt, to take a 14-0 lead, wouldn't it? I mean, who wouldn't love to get started with that? And if that's the case, that's great. But I think it'll be an interesting game to watch, and we're going to have lower scoring than it would have been last year.
Okay. In terms of looking at USC's overall roster, let's briefly look at the offensive side, because I think most USC fans have questions about the defense. But I think if there's one unit on the offensive side of the ball that USC fans, have some uncertainties about, it's the offensive line. Now, you said you're high on this offensive line, but in 2023, this unit did not give Caleb Williams the protection that he needed, especially in that Notre Dame game, also to an extent against Utah and also Oregon. So before we discuss the 2024 USC offensive line, Phil, why do you think the 2023 USC offensive line didn't come together as well as it could have or as well as it needed to?
Yeah, and allowing 33 sacks on the year is never a great thing, but they did average 4.8 yards per carry. They lose 3 starters this year, but last year's line, sometimes sacks are not always on the offensive line. Sometimes maybe the quarterback is holding on to the ball, trying to make that big play, trying to hold it on one more second. Sometimes it's your protection by the running backs or maybe even a tight end chipping. So I don't think the offensive line was horrible last year. Yes, Caleb Williams was doing that, but once again, maybe Caleb was holding on to the ball a little long.
All right, final question, Phil, and you've been awesome as always here at the Voice of College Football. What do you see for the 2024 offensive line? And in particular, you've followed this business as well and as closely as anyone. You've obviously followed Josh Henson from his time at Texas A&M. How big a season is this for Josh Henson at USC? We talk about Lincoln Riley. Josh Henson also has a lot to prove, I would think, after his 2023 season. How do you think he's going to bring along this 2024 USC offensive line?
Yeah, and that's going to be the key, I think, this year. Now, when I did talk to Lincoln Riley going over the team with him, he said the offensive line has a chance to be his best offensive line that he's had here in the 3 years, despite the loss of 3 starters. I think in having a guy like Monheim back at center, Pregnon at left guard, and then you look at Elijah Page, the redshirt freshman at left tackle. He is a really good young player, very talented. I think he's going to fill that spot well. Mason Murphy has some starting experience, as does Noah. So overall, I think it's probably going to be USC's best offensive line since Lincoln Riley's been here.
He is the one and only Phil Steele. Get his magazine at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, the 2 brick and mortar outlets, and of course, philsteele.com. Phil, thanks for giving of your time here at the Voice of College Football. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking football with you today, Matt. Thanks for having me on.